Hello, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Milos, for the wonderful introduction. I'm not going to talk too much right now, but I just want to let you know what you're about to see. So this is a project that's in process. I've been working on it for a couple years, slowly, because I'm teaching and running a film program. And I am an Alice Kaplan Fellow this year, so I have the entire year to be working on it. And this is a demo from what I've filmed so far. And so it's not a complete film. It's about 15 minutes. It is a little bit disturbing, so if anyone gets disturbed pretty easily, I'm just warning you. There's no blood or anything like that, but I've gotten used to having to warn my students about that. So anyway, I look forward to talking about it afterwards, so please enjoy. I also just briefly want to say thank you to film workers who did comp color correct, and Chad's back there also, who did a cut down of one of the demos. Okay, thank you. You know, I don't know if anyone who knows who Lee Beenan is, but she's a friend of mine, and she was working at the Center for Wrongful Conviction, and Rob Warden, who had been the executive director there, was stepping down, and she thought it was a really great time to make a film and said, why don't you come out to the Center for Wrongful Conviction? And I went out to the center, and I was kind of looking around for, you know, maybe a project. And there had been so many films that had been made about exonerees, especially men exonerees. I was thinking it would be interesting to follow a woman because they're usually accused of killing their children or their lover. And I ended up going to the symposium, and Penny got up and spoke. And I had no intention of making a film about this, but I was...
A public symposium, or...?
It was a symposium for exonerees,
okay.
And to honor Rob Warden. So there were a lot of exonerees there. There were people from the Innocence Project, you know, all types of speakers. But I was totally shook by her story, and also inspired by her fortitude, because her story, I don't know how many people here have seen Making a Murder? Okay. Well, you know it gets even more twisted. But at every turn, she seemed to take what happened to her and somehow use it towards trying to create a better world or do something positive. And I found that really inspiring. And I started dreaming about this story. So that's, I guess, how I got in.
And so then when you approached her, she was forthright, willing, a happy participant, not a happy participant, but I mean, happy to tell, or glad to tell her story, invested in wanting to tell a story, or no?
Penny had been on the circuit, like talking at witness panels and for exonerees, and after her experience, she really was, you know, a spokesperson about eyewitness identification. But and for those of you who haven't seen Making a Murderer, I apologize, but when Stephen ended up being convicted of another crime, people dropped it. And no one, you know, she was like, nobody wanted her to speak because the story was so tainted. When I approached her, you know, she was a little bit reticent, and I have to say, this is prior to Making a Murder. Making a Murder had not come out. She knew nothing about it coming out. The filmmakers had approached her, and she felt like they had something in mind they wanted to do, and she declined to participate in that project. I really wanted to make a project that was poetic, because I think there's a relationship between documentary film, especially in film, and memory. And I told her that. I told her I was interested in contaminating the film in a way, and that I wanted to use it to educate people and to make people more aware of the way memory works, so that we can maybe change some of the protocols.
And so what did you find out about how memory works from her participation and from making the film?
Well, it's a,
It doesn't work.
document, when you start making a film, it's kind of like, okay, am I going to invest in this? Because especially unless you're a millionaire, which I'm not, you start to bite on a project and all of a sudden it's like you're in it and you can be in it for many, many years. So you really have to think hard, like, is this something that I want to take on? And then once you do, it takes you on a journey. I would have never believed, for instance, that someone would confess to a crime they didn't commit prior to taking this on. And I would generally think our memories are accurate, and not so now. I don't think that. I'm going to actually share something that I haven't shared with people.
Please.
But I think, her story started to invade my dreams. And I was taking a run one day and I realized the connection between documentary film and her story, why it made sense to make it as a film, and that's when I decided to approach her. But I had my own experience with an attack or a potential attack that I didn't repress. It's not like I didn't know about it, but until last week, when this Me Too thing was going around on social media, I hadn't really made the connection. But I was actually almost attacked pretty brutally on a remoted beach, and at the time I didn't really think about it.
You suppressed this memory?
No,
you knew this, but
I never connected it. So perhaps that was another reason why her story resonated with me. I could have been Penny.
Well, the film is so intimate, and you really capture her. I mean, even in this short length here, very much her personality. She's very, very articulate about this. So there had to be an element of trust that you certainly built up over time. But so how did you decide on the approach, how you were going to shoot this?
Well, it's evolving, isn't it? Okay. I thought about contamination and the way that memory becomes contaminated, and all our memories are contaminated. And so I knew I wanted to also contaminate the film. And at first I thought, okay, I'm going to shoot it all. I'm going to shoot her interview, which I did, all green screen. And I'm going to go back to the location and shoot plates and put her in that location so it appears she's on the beach in this interview. And then maybe towards the end of the film, I would reveal that. And I did film her all in green screen, but then, it's a work in process. So as you're making it, you realize, maybe I don't want that. And I have been using it as voiceover so far.
How, one thing that's in the film is that after the DNA, why did it take 2 years for the DNA evidence to come to light towards the end of the film? That just seemed like such an extraordinary long time.
It goes, I'm not
just the process of justice.
I just, when you look at, I know we have some lawyers here. When you look at, yeah, you're snickering, so things can come to light and they can take forever to move through once you're in that kind of system. So you and Dave Tolchinsky had done an interesting exhibit, the horror show, and I read the introduction to it, and you had I thought actually what you wrote there in the introduction was kind of interesting and applicable to this. And if I can just read it back to you. It's been a while.
We were talking about horror, but you said we were attracted to work about the figure you aren't sure you saw, the sound you couldn't have heard, the memory you must have invented. We were attracted to work about paralyzing indecision and haunting regret, work that resees old things in new and disturbing ways, whether it be an old movie, a violent political event, or your own childhood. We were attracted to work about parts that may or may not fit together. The show, referring to the horror show, is about looking in the mirror, a mirror that shows you exactly as you are, that shows the abyss, and the abyss is you. That's pretty descriptive of where you went here. It was this.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't read that in a long time, and I had never made the connection. So thank you for for doing that. I guess I forgot. Which is, yeah, that was, thank you.
No, but I mean, in a way, this kind of elements of horror film or horror and memory are really a function of cinema for a long period of time. I mean, the whole question of memory plays a quite significant role in many, many films. And in a way, you could say that film is memory. And you said that documentary, the relationship between documentary and memory for you is very important. So what is that? What connection do you see there?
I'll see if I can be articulate about this,
okay.
but because I have been thinking about this a lot. I mean, in some ways, films are, when I went to film school back in the day, they would talk about film as dream. You turn off the lights, it's communal dream, you're all with a group. And in a way, film is also communal memory, and particularly documentary film, because often those images embed in us and they become the memory of an event. Like you think about the Kennedy assassination, or you think about 9/11 even, and as the actual event recedes and becomes more distant, you are left with those embedded memories from these images. Susan Sontag talked about that in a great book called On Photography, which I read a million years ago, but it's true for film. And there was another point I was going to make about it. Oh, and they're both edited. That's the other thing. Both of those things, so our memory of these historical events is heavily edited. It's, things are left out. It's colored by music. What lens are you using? What's in focus? Whose point of view is it? And our memories are like that too. We actually remember very little. And maybe that's evolution. There's one theory about, have you heard about this theory, fuzzy trace memory, about the way memory works?
What is it, fuzzy?
Okay, I'm not a scientist,
I understand, okay.
I probably won't remember. But basically, you have two types of memory that get laid down. One is gist memory, and it's basically you get the gist of it, like, I like you. I get a good feeling, I remember that about you. And the other is verbatim memory, so it's very specific. It's your eye color, it's your name. And gist memory actually lasts longer, and verbatim memory we remember very little of, and it doesn't last as long. But so when we go to recall, often we're relying on gist memory, and we fill in verbatim, which becomes the long-term memory, but it's improvised, or it's filled in based on what we think, based on the gist feeling.
Well, and it seems to me in Penny's case, when she connects here is being shown those photographs, and then seeing the lineup. So that's the connection. And I just wonder what role stress, for example, plays in this, because obviously her being assaulted is a stressful experience, and the post.
So, okay, let's break that down to a couple different things. Emotion. So memories that happen when there's an emotionally charged moment are different. Everything's firing in your brain, you're thinking about survival, and there's something called the focus effect, or there's another word in there, but it's basically the focus effect. So, and this is talked about a lot, but let's say I'm on a beach and someone comes up to me and they say they have a knife. And this is what happened to Penny. She starts looking at the leather jacket, and everything else recedes. the face recedes, the environment recedes, but the leather jacket is very clear because she's thinking, is it in his pocket? How big of a knife could it be? I don't see the knife, the pockets look small. And so she remembers absolutely clearly what that leather jacket looked like. But a lot of the other things get fuzzy. And in fact, after her attack, after Stephen was apprehended, they put together a leather jacket lineup, and she failed to identify his leather jacket because it wasn't there.
So it's interesting of how, I think it's really beautiful of how you put the audience, us as we're watching the film, kind of subjectively into her perspective, with giving us the close-ups of the leather jacket and the pockets and all of these things. I mean, it really makes it very visceral for us.
Well, point of view, that's you're in the place.
And also very much of how you use things like light in this film, I think, is really interesting. For example, I mean, that in the early scene of her drawing the blinds up, so we see that light coming through. So it's really about, in a way, framing her vision. I mean, what her vision is.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So what do you think is instructive about Penny's experience?
Well, okay, so I've begun this film. I've filmed a lot with Penny, but I'm also focusing on 2 other stories for the project.
And they're related in some way?
I'm still researching, but one of the stories is about someone who comes to believe they committed a crime that they didn't commit. So people are like, oh, who would ever do that? But in fact, I don't know who read The New Yorker a couple months ago about the Beatrix Six. 6 people were accused of a crime. 5 of them confessed. 2 of them internalized the memory. And the process of interrogation can really do this. And the third thing that I want to focus on in the film is someone from the inside. So I'm not interested in making a film that's pointing blame, but I am interested in understanding the phenomenon. So by having someone like a detective on the inside and kind of looking at this through 3 different points of view, I think it really opens up us to understand, how does this happen? We think it couldn't happen to us. It could happen to most of us. And how do you change protocols so that we make criminal justice work better, and so that even in your relationships or with other people, you understand this process? I'm sure people have all had fights with their spouses or, partners, and it's like a he said, she said, and both of you actually believe it, and that's because of the way memory works.
So how much, just back to the theme of belief, I mean, how much do you think preconditioned belief, or things that the kind of processes that we grow up believing of how things work, factor into this? Do you know what I mean?
Well, okay, in criminal justice, I think what you're getting at is the fact of, if somebody tells you something and you trust that person, and this is, I'm not a cognitive scientist, but I have been reading quite a bit. This is the way it works. So there's a couple things that happen. If whoever tells you that information, you trust, so if it's your psychiatrist, if it's police, who I had no idea are allowed to lie to you about evidence and stuff, you're much more likely to incorporate that, or if it's other people that say they witnessed it. So in a lot of these cases, what'll happen is, there's the Gary Gauger case. I think that's how I've only seen it in writing, but are people familiar with his case? He was convicted of killing both his parents in a double murder, and the police basically told him, you failed a polygraph, which wasn't true, he didn't, and we found a blood-soaked shirt in your house. Your shirt was soaked in blood in your house, and there was a bloody knife there, and he has no memory of the event, but they keep talking. So the longer it goes on, the more chance also it is that you accept this. And he's like, they must be telling me the truth. It must have happened. How could it have happened? You start to imagine it. And when you visualize things and imagine them, you actually can produce a memory of it that is the same for all intensive purposes as your actual memory of that event, of another event. So
in a way, extending this politically, I mean, this can get to be a pretty dangerous thing, right? I mean, considering the times that we live in.
Yes, yes.
So, give us some trajectory of where your project and your progression with this film is going. What are you wanting to be ultimately?
Well, I'm looking to make a feature.
Okay.
I have about a third of it filmed. I have Penny's story. I've filmed with her extensively. I'm currently doing research for the other pieces this year and hoping to film. And any film angels, I'm looking for funding.
You are all film angels, right? And you have a unique opportunity.
So the film's going to get made, but that's what I'm in the process of doing. But I see it as a feature. I think that it would be really useful for a film like this. I mean, you have to bring people into character, I think, in order to identify. I think it's much better than I probably do need to contextualize with some of the expert testimony, but we
don't.
Yeah. We empathize with people. We through film, we're able to see something through someone else's point of view. It's really a powerful medium for that, and it makes us understand how something like this could happen. So,
well, it's just that expert testimonies are such a cliche of documentary filmmaking. I mean, talking head. And the thing that's so wonderful and compelling here is that it's really coming from this person who is a character. I mean.
Yeah. But I think it's important to understand that it really could happen to most of us. I mean, Elizabeth Loftus, I know you're familiar with her research, and Julia Shaw, did this how many people are scientists here? Are there scientists in the room? Okay, familiar with her research about Lost in the Mall. So she did that a while ago, but it was basically, she wanted to see if you could implant a memory. And so she took like 24 people, and she found 3 stories that were true from their childhood, and then she fabricated one where they got lost in the mall, and they cried, and they met a stranger who was an older woman, and they were reunited with their parents, and gave them a booklet about this, and they read it, and then asked them, if what they remembered, and like 29% of them believed this false thing because there was enough accurate information that was also put in. And Julia Shaw has taken that with remarkably. She's involved in studying memory and crime and law, and she wanted to see how many people could be convinced they committed a crime. So just out of curiosity, how many people here think you could be convinced that you committed a violent crime?
Oh, thank you. Well, that's great.
So a few people only.
Yeah. Well, because the few honest people.
Well, what she found is basically if you have some accurate information, and over a period of 3 weeks, getting the people, at first they didn't remember it, and I'm talking about a crime that's like, not like you jaywalked, like a crime that's, you committed a theft as a teenager or you assaulted someone. 70% of people came to believe after 3 weeks that they had, in fact, done this. So none of us believe that, but it's science, so it must be true.
Anyone have questions, comments over here?
Question. She said she studies his face so carefully, and in the deposition, she said brown eyes, and he has blue. Was there ever, did they just look at that as possibly couldn't focus into it, or, I mean,
eyewitness testimony is, and I want to be careful that I don't say that all eyewitness, women are attacked, men are attacked, and, I don't want to throw out everything, but it has to be corroborated. In fact, Gregory Allen and Stephen Avery have the wrong eye color for what she said. So she was mistaken on both fronts. And I don't know whether you noticed in the film any contamination. So, I don't know if I'll go into that.
Well,
So, I made his eyes even bluer in the film, except for when you see them together, I turned them brown. None of you noticed. So the film is contaminated in terms of color. It's also contaminated in terms of sound, in terms of location. I am doing the same thing to you. I am contaminating your memory of these events by the way I'm making this film.
That's great.
And that's why I think this is the perfect type of topic to make a film about.
Sorry.
Besides memory being contaminated, social pressure can cause you to rethink yourself and come up with something totally absurd. There are experiments done where there are people, 20 people in a room, one naive subject, everybody else is into it. They put two lines on the surface. The lines are unequal, longer one, shorter one. They ask people in the room, well, which is the longer one? The majority of the people raise their hand for the shorter one. The naive subject at first kind of just looks around, confused. They do that several times. The next time he puts his hand up for the shorter one, and with time will really be convinced, the confirmation bias is what it's called, will be convinced that, in fact, that shorter one is the longer one. That's right in front of them while they're looking at it.
Yep.
So that's what you were talking about in terms of the investigations and people around you, around the arrested subject, saying this is...
Absolutely. If people are telling you they witnessed it, you're wrong, there's social pressure, you're much more likely to incorporate what they think, especially if you trust them. But yeah, confirmation bias. Memory is incredibly suggestible. I think Elizabeth Loftus said it's born anew every day.
Question?
And that really, in a court of law, it shouldn't just be, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing. And she said this, not I, but it should also be, or what I remember of the truth.
Right.
Because it's not that people don't think they're correct.
Right.
It's
What they believe.
what they believe. I guess that's why I'm here.
The film states that the accused was the only one that was in both lineups. Is that an example of something that would influence you? And also, I wondered, did they have any idea? Are people in lineups people who've committed crimes, or usually not?
So a perpetrator absent, it was perpetrator absent lineup, meaning the real person was not in the lineup, but she'd already seen him in the photo and identified, and she got confirmation bias, basically suggestions that she had identified the right person because that's who they thought it was. They had his picture there at the hospital when they laid it down. So the police already had this in their head, or the detective, they lay it down. She's picking up social cues, suggestion, maybe he looked the most like of the photos. Once she sees that photo, then she goes to the live lineup, she sees him a second time. The actual perpetrator isn't there. For all intents and purposes, he became her assailant, and he stayed her assailant, and still that's who she sees. So that you remember, your memory is formed by re-remembering. So it's not the initial, it's what gets contaminated and implanted. And in terms of your question about whether criminals, and this was kind of funny because Penny laughed about it when I was talking to her about the lineup, she assumed they were all from the jail. But she said, do you know how hard it was to get people with beards, not now, but during that time, for a lineup? So they pulled everybody off the street, the mailman, the guy that works, and they were all just, in the lineup. And then when she saw them walk out the door after the lineup, she freaked. She was like, those people just left the jailhouse. And they're like, yeah, he's the mailman. So, yeah.
We have a question over here.
Okay.
You said you started making the film before Making the Murderer came out. After that came out, how did that change your feelings about making the film and Penny's feelings about participating?
Yeah, great question. It blew everything open. I mean, it really was. I was just going to make a film about Penny, but I had some ethical concerns about going into the Teresa Halbach murder, and my main interest was really about memory. And when Making a Murderer came out, people were binge watching it. Everyone was weighing in. Obama got a petition that they should be freed. I mean, it became a sensationalized media circus. And for the people that are at the center of those cases, that is extremely painful. And the ethics of that, I really toy with. I'm not saying I'm completely absolved because I'm making a film on this subject matter, but I'm hopefully doing it in order to make some changes in the system and not purely for entertainment. It's not about who we're going to cast to play Penny. It created serious PTSD for a lot of the people. I think for the Halbach family, it's extremely painful. And it gave her pause. I think she was unsure if she wanted to continue. But ultimately, we talked about it, and she trusted me, and she never really trusted them. I urge you to read a fantastic article in The New Yorker by Catherine Schultz about this that is probably the best thing I've read. Have you read that? No, I did not. It's great. I mean, she talks about, I think Making a Murderer has done some great things, and I'm not going to really weigh in on that too much, except to say that in some ways they become guilty of what they accuse the police department or the detectives of doing, where you just filter out anything that doesn't go along with your theory.
We have a question in the back of the room.
I'm really confused over what you're trying to do. You say you want to fix the system, but you've got several stories here. You have the story of her, how she feels about this. You've got obvious police misconduct, suppression of evidence. You have confirmation bias. That's a totally improper way to do the suggestive lineups. And you have a whole scientific thing. We know how the memory works. We know what's faulty about it. We know exactly what happened here. They physiologically, you can have people that will show you the parts of the brain and how it actually works. And there's a lot of scientific evidence about memory. For instance, the people who are the biggest climate deniers are the most intelligent, most well-informed people about the climate. It's just that they have a philosophical complaint against the government. And because memory says, if I know I'm right, cognitive dissonance says I'm going to explain away everything that doesn't agree with me because I know I'm right. I don't want the government, and the government will solve climate change, and therefore I'm going to deny that climate change exists.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
You have all those stories, and what I'm asking is, what's your purpose, and what is it that you're actually going to do with the movie?
I actually disagree with you. I don't think most people understand the way memory works. I think most people believe... Hang on a sec. Let me answer, please. I think most people don't understand how memory works. And in fact, I talked to a judge a couple weeks ago who was shocked that anyone would sign a confession if they hadn't done the crime. And he's a top-level judge. And when I told him about some of these studies, he knew nothing about it. So I don't think most people do know the way memory works. And I think by explaining that more through these type of stories and putting it out there, it will change the way, and this science is changing ideas about how the protocol should be for investigations. Julia Shaw has been working in Germany, in fact, who is the scientist, this cognitive scientist I mentioned earlier, with German police, creating new protocols that actually prevent a lot of these type of false, wrongful convictions and false confessions. And we have 350 DNA exonerated wrongful confessions. So, and police don't know. I talked to a detective who ran 250 police, and he said police get no training in this type of thing. They don't know how it works. And I think with education, we can change the protocol and still have good investigations, but get towards truth as opposed to evaluating police stations based on whether they get a confession or close a case. But we evaluate that based on truth.
Just a question. You mentioned she got the eye color wrong of her attacker. Are there certain facial features that you will remember? Like, I think she got the hair color and the beard color right. Is there any signs about you're going to get certain things right, or just everything's maybe when it comes to memory?
I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on that. There is this weapon effect. So if something, if you feel like something you have to focus on, maybe you focus on that, but I don't, I know there's like psychology about we recognize faces but it doesn't seem like it.
Well, now you're going to have software that recognizes us.
Yeah.
Okay. This is profoundly disturbing. How do we protect ourselves? Shall we keep a diary of where we are? I mean, this is very upsetting that we can't remember.
Well, I read one thing, which I thought was really interesting about memory, and that memory has, I don't know if it's true, but it makes sense. We haven't evolved to have high fidelity memory. And the reason why is because you want it to be adaptable for survival. So like 9/11 happens, we see those pictures of the planes hitting the tower. You're in the tower, you're going to get out. You see planes coming, you're going to get out immediately. You want to be able to adapt information so that you can survive situations. So, and maybe we're not meant to remember everything. How horrible would that be? There's a lot of stuff I'm quite frankly very happy to have forgotten and to reinvent.
We have time for one last question back here.
You mentioned some efforts regarding changing the protocols. And in some sciences, people already try to address these issues for a very long time. For example, if you look at medical drug studies, they're doubly blind. So would there something similar should be done in evidential discovery as well?
Oh, I think it should, yeah. And I think part of that has to do with the protocol of like how long you can keep a suspect, whether some of the things that have been suggested are like, it should be taped from beginning to end. You can't have suggestions. You can't have collusion with other, people giving more information. In some of these cases where like 6 people confess, their stories all begin to sound the same because they hear each other's story and then they incorporate it so that in the beginning they're really different and by the end they're all the same. So,
well, and it was what I was saying about belief systems, because there's also a certain kind of mythology that you get from movies or whatever else, how things function, so that kind of informs under pressure what you would think that you're expected to say. Right? I mean, it kind of factors into that.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have.
All right, you were an awesome audience.
Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Milos. And I also want to thank Dave, my spouse, who is associate producer on this. And thank you very much for coming. It's a privilege.
Thank you all.